So when you look at companies that have grown up in more the technology or the IT space, who do you point back to that's done it right and made that transition?
I actually think transitions are extremely hard. I know I'm kind of getting out of your question here, but I wouldn't say it's easy to build the right solution from scratch. But often when you are benchmarking best-in-class companies, they are the ones that have done this for the first time. So it's the Ubers of the world, it's the Lyfts of the world. There's a kind of delivery service in the UK called DPD, I think they're called. That's where you tend to have the first best-in-class experience. I think slowly, sort of large legacy companies are catching up. Occasionally you'll get a kind of a visit from a gas repair person in the UK, and you're surprised that you're able to talk directly with them. Occasionally there'll be a sort of medium-sized real estate agency that's incorporating some of this technology into them. But broadly speaking, and I'm not a remotely pessimistic person, but broadly speaking, I'm surprised at how long it's taking. I think a lot of companies are focusing on the wrong KPIs. They assume this is about automation more than it is about better customer service. They assume it's about cost cutting rather than the level of intimacy. They assume that these tools are there to sort of bypass people rather than augment people. So off the top of my head, it's actually quite hard to think of companies that have done a good job so far, which is not to be miserable. It's just to point out the opportunity that's out there.
Yeah. So are you familiar with the book, 4 Steps to the Epiphany?
I think I've bought it somewhere and I haven't read it yet. Yeah.
So that one was transformative for me. I got that from a Gartner conference back in 2015 or 2016. And that was really transformative. And I actually brought that back, and our entire leadership team read that book. And it is about thinking about your customer and really actually going out and developing what you're doing around the customer. What are their needs? What's a day in the life of the customer look like? And to your point, it's not cost cutting and automation aren't those things that customers are looking for right off the bat. They're just looking for more intimate and a better experience, right? So what are you mentioned KPIs, for a company that's digging in and trying to get closer to their customers. What are those KPIs that they should be thinking about?
It's a very good question, because I tend to think that most KPIs are acting as a proxy to something that's far more important, but actually can't really be measured that satisfactorily. Often we take things which are convenient ways to measure something that should probably help gauge the most important thing. We might sort of measure time spent to solve an inquiry. We might focus on the number of communications that went back and forth. But ultimately, it's quite hard to know if a longer conversation was a better one or a shorter one. There's a particularly bizarre thing, I think, in the world right now, where if we spend money on marketing or on advertising and talk to people as a mass audience, we consider that to be a sort of investment. We sort of presume that reaching more people and talking to more people is a good thing. We hope that one day our ads for a BMW or our money off coupon for a cheaper flight, we hope that people will notice them and do something about it. And in the moment they receive it and try and get in touch with us, we consider that to be operations. We don't sort of think of that as marketing. So I think in a way it's less about KPIs in the moment, and it's more about reorienting our companies around the idea that people talking to us is actually a good thing. We actually need to sort of separate out different types of customer contact. Some customer contact is a problem. Some of it is things that could be solved by a better Q&A section on the website. Some of it is people having technical problems logging in. But some of it is people actively starting a sales process. Some of it is people wanting to find out if they can upgrade. Some of it is people trying to find out if they can, pay more money to move the flight to another date. So I think in a way, most of our KPIs are actually wrong at the moment. We obviously have things like NPS, which I personally think is one of the most sort of disappointing metrics there are. I think it's a sort of travesty that when we have the opportunity to learn something from a customer, all we're asking them to do is to give us a number. I can see why these things happen, but I think if the goals are really about tracking where we're doing, then some of these metrics make sense. But if it's actually about improving, then we should probably go about the whole process in a different way. We should probably be looking at much more qualitative feedback. We should be looking at a much more honest and sort of two-way conversation with people. We should actually be discussing with them. We should be looking broader. I think a lot of KPIs are used to track us against other people that are most alike us. So if you're a bank, you'll look at other banks. If you're a retailer, you'll look at other large retailers. What can Verizon's cable delivery people learn from the gas fixers of Sweden? What can a bank learn from a pharmaceutical delivery company in Thailand? What can an interesting media provider in New Zealand, learn from an Israeli startup that's helping recruit people into the armed forces? I think our world of comparison and our world of inspiration should be much broader.
Yeah. So lots of good talking points there. Let's say you're at one of these technology companies and you're trying to make that transition into being more customer centric. If I'm a technologist, I'm awash in data right now. I know how many calls are coming into the contact center. I know how many people are logged into my service, average daily users. I know what people are clicking on. But to your point, that doesn't necessarily take the place of a real conversation with your customer. How do I make that transition into more customer centric and start making moves that will impact the customer experience and ultimately impact my business?
I mean, step one, this sounds almost quite rude, but step one is to realize that this isn't some sort of dark art. This isn't nuclear physics. Customers are just people. So if you've got friends, if you've got like a wife or a husband or a partner, if you've got kids, then you're surrounded by these people that we call customers. We can all imagine what it's like to be someone else to some extent. So I think it's more about opening our minds to the idea that, true empathy is about putting themselves in their shoes. So what must it be like to be a typical customer that's trying to get in touch with a company urgently? It's not necessarily something that's as hard as we think it is. The second thing is to put yourself in these situations. I know a reasonable number of companies will have programs where they make sure that their marketing team, sit in a call center for one day. A reasonable number of marketers will get the call logs. They will get transcripts of chat interface interactions. So I think we need to kind of fall in love with this stuff a bit more. I think, I have a kind of fairly famous line about we need to be interested in technology and curious about technology, but we should really be obsessed with people. And somehow I think the world has sort of fallen into two tribes. And there is a kind of technology tribe. And the technology tribe is fascinated by logic and sort of driven by numbers. They sort of believe that things can be measured, things can be optimized. There's such a thing as a right answer. They believe that people follow quite rational processes. And that way of thinking is amazing, but it also has its flaws. And I think being open to the idea that creative solutions, the outlandish solutions, the weird solutions, the bits of humanity, that by incorporating a kind of more full sense of what is best is actually a much more satisfactory way to solve a problem. There's sort of weird things in life where, you may presume that the more that you fly with an airline, the more loyalty points that you want to get. There's probably a certain point where if you fly more than an amount, you probably need, marriage counseling, or you probably need, better sort of diary management software or something. You probably don't want any more miles. For me, the sort of the wonder to marketing and sort of business transformation is to sort of marry the potential of technology with an appreciation and a respect and a fondness for people, and what causes delight, what causes anger. How can you tweak these systems? How can you manage expectations? How can you use technology to make every process as delightful and as easy as it could be? And sometimes that means faster, sometimes that means better. It all depends on the situation. Cool. We've all sort of got a lot of a long flights and checked into a luxury hotel where they're determined to have a long conversation with us about the things to do in the area, when actually it's the last thing that we want. But similarly, we've all sort of done a self-checkout into a kind of a hotel in an industrial park in Reading, and we've always thought that it was a bit odd that we had to do the admin ourselves. So these things are very context dependent as well.
Yeah. So the companies that get it right, does this understanding the customer better, does this sit in an innovation center in the company? Is it a product manager that's doing this? Where does this live?
This is a very good question. I think generally speaking, no one knows where to put any of this stuff. For a long time, companies knew what they were doing. Then when, the computers and the internet and Wi-Fi and cellular internet and APIs and all sorts of technology, the moment that was introduced, the only way that companies could really deal with it was by adding it into existing departments. So I can still sort of remember the days where IT, was a kind of dark office on sort of ground floor somewhere. And I think over time, we've never really known how to go from that forwards. So sometimes these things are centers of excellence where every department may feed into it. Sometimes you get these people sort of chucked into a sort of innovation department or a transformation department. Sometimes you get a sort of a figurehead for it. So you get sort of an evangelist, but then they don't have the team to support them. I think probably these things belong as a center of excellence that every department taps into. And I think almost every long-term business planning process should include feedback from that team. I don't think it's realistic to put them in marketing because that presupposes that they're not in operations. So either you try and replicate these people everywhere, or you try and have a kind of a nimble resource that other people can pull upon. But in a way, it's less about the talent and it's more about the mindset. Like it's more that you need people across your company, to be thinking, how can we do this better? How can we be providing people with more personalized service? How can we be making things as seamless as they can be? How can we automate things so that people don't need to talk to us? How can we use best-in-class technology to make people feel good about what they just did?
Yeah. So I spent some time in Seattle with Amazon, and one of the big things that we had there, this was way back in the day before AWS, one of the big things we always did was start from the perspective of the customer and work your way backwards. Mm-hmm. And unprofitable to begin with, but you'd always figure out operationally how to make things profitable. But if you always had the customer as your North Star, you were always moving in the right direction, right? Do you see that as still being relevant in today?
I think it's absolutely relevant. I think, it's amazing to me how many times I take part in meetings where everything is about the company itself and how it operates. And, I know Amazon also was sort of famous for having an empty chair in the meeting that was supposed to sort of represent the consumer. It is down to that, but it's also about putting them on all charts. Like actually almost every company completely turns their back on people. Within the structure of most companies, there's a remarkably small number of people who have the remit to focus on people. So I think a process to put the customer first is essential, but also companies have to maintain that. And, I don't want to be too critical about Amazon, but a lot of the things they do have done in the last 5 years have not been particularly customer-centric. If you go to their website today, there's a lot of organizational and operational complexity, which is starting to sort of bubble up. I know that their retail ad business is incredibly profitable, but it's quite hard to justify the idea that that's in the interests of its customers. So it's not just like a kind of something you do to start. It should be more of a sort of mindset as well as a process.
Cool. So on the top of everybody's mind right now, at least everybody I talk to, is AI, Chat GPT. We're seeing a lot of convergence in technologies that can automate and do some cool stuff. And I've definitely seen benefits as we think about marketing and getting content going. It's been a huge help. But as you think about the customer experience, are you excited about these technologies, fearful, or where's your head at?
I'm extremely excited. I'm quite sort of overwhelmed by how brilliant it could be. My concerns do not come from this idea there's going to be a kind of runaway effect and these things will become self-aware and take over the planet. I'm more worried that we'll use it in the wrong way. In a very simplistic way, technology is a lever to what people can do. And we can either ensure that people do less and technology does more, and we maintain the sort of service level at the moment, or we can even cut back further and sort of make systems that are just about good enough and almost entirely automated. And we make things worse, but costs are tending to zero. My hope is that we go the other way. My hope that this isn't a way to replace people, it's a way to augment people. My hope is that we don't just apply AI as the patch to all problems. Actually, maybe it should be possible for people to do more self-service. Maybe it should be possible for people to answer their own queries without using customer service mechanisms. I think this thing can't be the solution. It should be a valuable tool, which one we use to do what we're currently doing in a more effective and better way. And two, we start doing things that we've not even thought about doing before because we always knew it was impossible. There are obviously things like personalized marketing at scale, which has kind of been the holy grail for a long time. You can start to see how AI actually makes that possible and desirable. So my big hope is that we use it in a very ambitious and imaginative and somewhat audacious way, rather than as a kind of usability fix on systems that we don't want to fix.
Yeah. So I like that. And we've been big proponents of AI is to help people, not replace people. A little bit over a year ago, we did a big event, one of the companies I was working for. And after the event, I had 2 people for 2 weeks splicing up videos and doing all these things. And these were high-powered people, right? And a couple of weeks ago, I took a similar number of videos and fed it into an AI content splicer and did all these things. And in a matter of 2 days, a guy that doesn't do this for a living did all of the work of 2 people, right? And I sat back and thought, I was like, oh my God, if I had that technology back when we did this, those 2 people, I wouldn't have fired those 2 people. They were 2 of my brightest people. I would have had them doing all of these other work, all of these other things that would have moved the business forward. So I think it is really powerful to think about it as an aid versus a replacer.
Absolutely. And when is the handover part of that process as well? Like at what point does a human get in the loop and take it to sort of final conclusion? Because it's unlikely that these things can make everything perfect. It's that they can probably do 95% of the job. Yeah. And the last 5% is actually where all the magic is added. So